The screech didn't sound like brakes. It sounded like a scream dying in metal's throat. I looked up from the wet pavement just as the black luxury sedan fishtailed through the intersection of East Monroe and 8th, headlights carving wild arcs through the rain-soaked neon. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe. New stories unfold here every day, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. And don't forget to comment which state you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in. The impact came next. A bone-deep crack as 2 tons of steel kissed the curb at 40 miles per hour. The car spun once, twice, glass exploding outward like 1,000 falling stars, before it slammed to a stop against the streetlight pole. The pole bent. Sparks showered down into the puddles. Then silence, the kind that rings in your ears after violence. I stood frozen on the corner, my diner uniform soaked through, the smell of burned rubber and gasoline flooding my lungs. My name is Amaya Adams. I'm a waitress at Ruby's 24-hour diner, and I just finished a double shift. My feet ached, my back ached. I wanted nothing more than to collapse into my bed 3 blocks away and pretend the world didn't exist until my alarm went off at 6 a.m. But the driver's door of that sedan swung open. A man stumbled out, tall, broad-shouldered, his white dress shirt torn and darkening with blood. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the tattoos crawling up the side of his neck like black serpents. He took 2 steps forward, then dropped to one knee on the shattered glass, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other braced against the wet asphalt. I didn't think. Ran. My sneakers splashed through puddles, my bag bouncing against my hip. The rain pounded harder. The neon signs from the bodega and the closed pawnshop bled pink and blue into the street. I reached him just as his head started to drop. Hey! Hey, stay with me! I shouted, ducking under his arm and hauling his weight onto my shoulder. He was heavy, solid muscle beneath the soaked fabric. His breath came in ragged gasps against my ear, hot and sharp with pain. I staggered but held firm, dragging him away from the wreckage as steam hissed from the crumpled hood. His voice came out low, rough, commanding, even now. Don't call the police. The way he said it made my stomach drop. But I didn't argue. I just kept moving. Kept his weight distributed across my shoulders the way I'd learned when my mother could no longer walk on her own. That's when I felt it, the hard shape pressing against my ribs from inside his coat. A gun. Not a cop's service weapon. Not a legal carry permit holster. Something else. Something that smelled like danger. I should have let go. I should have run the other way. But his eyes, dark, burning with something fierce and exhausted and desperate, locked onto mine. Please, he breathed. And that single word, cracked and human, undid every instinct screaming at me to drop him and run. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a paramedic. I'm not anyone special. I'm Amaya Adams. Everyone just calls me Amaya. And I work the graveyard shift slinging eggs and coffee to truckers and insomniacs. But my mother was sick for 3 years before she passed. Lupus, then kidney failure. Then complications that turned our little apartment into a makeshift clinic. I learned to steady shaking hands, to pack wounds with gauze, to keep someone conscious when their body wanted to quit. So when I got this bleeding stranger to my front door, when I sat him down on my second-hand couch and peeled back his torn shirt to reveal the gash along his ribs, I didn't panic. I just did what I knew how to do. Cleaned the wound. Wrapped it tight. Watched his chest rise and fall while I pressed a cold cloth to the cut above his temple. He never looked away from me. Not with fear, not with gratitude. Just with this quiet, unnerving intensity, like he was cataloging every detail of my face. "What's your name?" he finally asked. His voice still rough but steadier now. "Amaya." He nodded once. "Kyle." No last name. No explanation. Nothing else. But later, while I was bandaging his shoulder, his jacket slipped open. I saw the wallet. Black leather. Expensive. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Kyle Sanders. And beneath his driver's license, a sleek black metal card. No logo. No company name. Just the kind of card that whispered power and money and don't ask questions. I didn't know who Kyle Sanders was. Not yet. But I knew enough to understand that saving him might have been the most dangerous thing I'd ever done. So I let him sleep on my couch. And I stayed awake in the chair across from him, listening to the rain drum against the windows, listening for sirens that never came, praying I hadn't just invited a monster into my home. The sound of the crash cut through the rain like a thunderclap. Sharp, violent, wrong. I jerked my head up just in time to see the black sedan lose control at the intersection, tires shrieking against wet asphalt as it spun in a sickening blur of metal and momentum. It slammed into the curb with a sound that rattled my bones, glass bursting outward in a glittering spray. The car came to rest against a bent streetlight, steam rising from the crumpled hood into the rain-heavy air. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, my diner uniform plastered to my skin, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. My name is Amaya Adams, and I'd been walking home from a late shift at Ruby's 24-hour diner when the world exploded into chaos. I should have kept walking. I should have called 911 and waited for someone with a badge and training to handle it. But the driver's door opened, and a man fell out. He was big, broad shoulders, dark clothes, blood streaking down his jaw. Tattoos wound up his neck like shadows given form. He took 2 stumbling steps, then collapsed to one knee, one hand clutching his ribs. Something inside me snapped into action. I ran toward him, my feet splashing through puddles, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd spent 3 years caring for my dying mother, learning to bandage wounds, to stop bleeding, to keep someone alive when they wanted to give up. Maybe that's why I didn't hesitate. Maybe that's why I reached him before logic could stop me. "Hey, stay with me," I said, my voice firmer than I felt as I ducked under his arm and took his weight. He was heavy, solid, his breath coming in harsh gasps against my neck. But I held him steady, the way I'd held my mother when she could no longer stand alone. His voice came out rough, commanding despite the pain. "Don't call the police." The words should have terrified me. They should have sent me running. But when his eyes met mine, dark, burning, human, something shifted. "Please," he whispered. And in that moment, he wasn't dangerous. He was just someone who needed help. So I helped him. Look, I'm not the type of person who runs toward danger. I'm the type who keeps her head down, finishes her shift, and walks home without making eye contact. I don't do drama. I don't do heroics. I serve coffee and eggs to strangers at 2 a.m. and I mind my own business. But that night, that night, the crash happened right in front of me. 1 second I was walking past East Monroe and 8th, rain soaking through my sneakers, thinking about how badly my feet hurt. The next, this black luxury car was spinning out of control, tires screaming, metal crunching as it slammed into the curb. Glass shattered everywhere. Steam hissed from the hood. The whole street smelled like burning rubber and gasoline. And then the driver stumbled out. He was bleeding, badly. His shirt was torn, his jaw streaked with red, and there were these tattoos crawling up his neck that should have been my first warning sign. He took 2 steps, then dropped to his knees right there on the wet pavement. I should have called 911. I should have stayed back and let professionals handle it. But I'm Amaya Adams, and I spent 3 years keeping my mother alive when her body was failing. I know how to stop bleeding. I know how to keep someone conscious. And I couldn't just stand there and watch him die. So I ran to him. "Hey, stay with me," I said, pulling his arm over my shoulders and taking his weight. He was heavy, all muscle and barely contained power, but I managed. Barely. "Don't call the police," he growled through gritted teeth. That's when I should have dropped him and run. That's when I should have realized I was in over my head. But his eyes found mine, dark, desperate, real, and he said one word. "Please." And just like that, I was committed. I got him to my apartment, patched him up, and watched him pass out on my couch while the rain kept falling outside my window. His name was Kyle Sanders. I found his wallet while bandaging his shoulder. Expensive leather, black metal card that screamed money and power. I didn't know who he really was. Not yet. But I knew I'd just made a choice that would change everything. The apartment was small. Too small for secrets, but somehow we made room. I helped Kyle to the couch, his weight sagging against me as we crossed the threshold. He collapsed onto the worn cushions with a grunt, his hand pressed to his ribs, his breathing shallow and controlled. Blood had seeped through his shirt, darkening the fabric to black. "Don't move," I said, already pulling supplies from the bathroom cabinet. My apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a kitchen the size of a closet. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the walls and the radiator clanged all winter like it was trying to break free. But it was mine. And more importantly, it was invisible. The kind of place nobody looked twice at. The kind of place you could disappear in. I returned with gauze, antiseptic, and the first aid kit I'd kept stocked since my mother's illness. Muscle memory took over. The same careful movements I'd performed 1,000 times before. Peel back the fabric. Assess the damage. Clean the wound before infection sets in. Kyle's shirt was ruined. I had to cut it away with scissors, the blade slicing through expensive fabric like it was paper. Beneath it, his torso was a landscape of old scars and fresh bruises. The gash along his ribs wasn't deep enough for stitches, but it was ugly, raw and seeping. "This is going to sting," I warned. He didn't flinch when the antiseptic hit. Didn't make a sound. Just watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes as I worked. His jaw tight. His breathing steady despite the pain. I'd spent 3 years caring for my mother. 3 years watching her body fail piece by piece. Kidneys shutting down, joints swelling, fevers that spiked without warning. I'd learned to be calm when everything inside me was screaming. Learned to keep my hands steady even when they wanted to shake. Ruby's 24-hour diner didn't pay much, but it paid enough. Night shifts mostly. Truckers and insomniacs and people running from things they didn't want to name. I poured coffee, flipped eggs, listened to strangers' problems because listening was easier than thinking about my own. I had maybe 2 friends. 3 if you counted the delivery guy who always left extra spring rolls with my Chinese takeout. This, helping a bleeding stranger with a gun hidden under his coat, was the most reckless thing I'd done in years. "You're good at this," Kyle said suddenly. His voice rough but steady. I wrapped the gauze around his ribs, my fingers working with practiced efficiency. "My mother was sick for a long time. You learn." "Was. She passed 2 years ago." He nodded once, something shifting behind his eyes. Not pity. Something else. Understanding maybe. Or recognition. "I'm sorry," he said. The words surprised me. They sounded genuine. I finished wrapping his ribs, then moved to the cut above his temple. He tilted his head slightly, giving me access, still watching me with that quiet, calculating intensity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amaya." "Amaya," he repeated like he was testing the weight of it. "I'm Kyle." No last name. No explanation. It was Kyle. I pressed the cloth to his temple, wiping away blood, and his jacket shifted. That's when I saw the wallet. Black leather, thick with cards. It had fallen halfway out of his pocket. I shouldn't have looked. But after he finally closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under, I did. Kyle Sanders, the driver's license read. 32 years old. An address in the kind of neighborhood where doormen wore suits and apartments had views of the skyline. And beneath the license, that black metal card. No bank logo. No name. Just smooth, cold metal that caught the lamplight like oil on water. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart beating too fast. Then I put the wallet back exactly where I'd found it. Kyle slept. His breathing deep, and even now, his face finally relaxed. He looked almost human like this. Almost harmless. But I knew better. I sat in the chair across from him, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like lavender detergent, listening to the rain drum against the windows. The city was quiet at this hour, that strange suspended silence between night and morning when even the chaos pauses to breathe. I should have called the police. Should have walked away the moment I saw that gun. But I hadn't. And now, sitting in the darkness of my small apartment with a dangerous stranger sleeping on my couch, I realized something that made my stomach twist with equal parts fear and certainty. I had just saved someone who could destroy me. Or worse, someone who could pull me into a world I'd never escape from. The rain kept falling, and I kept watching. Morning came soft through my windows, pale gray light filtering through cheap curtains. The rain finally reduced to a mist. I woke in the chair, my neck stiff, my body aching from sleeping upright. Kyle was already awake, sitting on the edge of the couch, his bandaged torso catching the dim light. He'd found his torn shirt and draped it across his lap, but hadn't put it back on. Even injured, even exhausted, he held himself with a kind of controlled power that made the small room feel smaller. "Coffee?" I asked, standing and stretching, trying to pretend this was normal. That having a mysterious stranger sleep on my couch was just another Tuesday. "Please." I moved to the kitchen, 3 steps from the living room, and started the ancient coffee maker. It sputtered and hissed like it always did, filling the apartment with the smell of cheap grounds and steam. Behind me I heard Kyle stand, heard the quiet rustle of movement. When I turned back with 2 mugs, he was by the window, one hand braced against the frame, looking out at the street below. The bandages wrapped around his ribs were clean, white against his tanned skin. The tattoos on his neck seemed darker in the morning light, serpents and symbols I didn't recognize. "You should probably go," I said, handing him the coffee, "before my neighbors start asking questions." He took the mug, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment. "Yeah, probably." But he didn't move toward the door. He just stood there, staring out the window, his jaw tight. That's when I heard it. "Engines. Whoa. Multiple." The sound rolled down the street like distant thunder, coordinated and deliberate. Kyle's entire body went rigid. The coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. I moved to the window beside him and looked down. My heart stopped. 5 black SUVs rolled down my street in perfect formation. Slow, measured, inevitable. They weren't speeding. They weren't hesitating. They moved like a funeral procession, like soldiers, like something out of a movie I didn't want to be in. The wet pavement reflected their dark shapes, doubling them, making it look like 10 vehicles instead of 5. They stopped in front of my building. All 5. Simultaneously. The engines cut off in perfect unison. "Kyle," I whispered, but the word died in my throat. Car doors opened. Men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black coats and dark boots. Counted 8 of them. Maybe more. They moved with military precision, taking positions around the vehicles, hands resting near their coats in ways that made my skin crawl. Earpieces. Sunglasses despite the overcast morning. Guns, I was sure of it. Hidden but present. My breath vanished. "Who are they?" I managed, my voice barely audible. Kyle didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, staring down at the street, his expression unreadable. Not surprised. Not panicked. Just tired. "They found me," he said finally, his voice flat. "Who found you?" He turned to face me then, and something in his eyes had changed. The vulnerability from last night, the desperation, the humanity, was gone. What remained was cold, calculated, dangerous. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. My hands were shaking. I set my coffee mug on the windowsill before I dropped it. "Kyle Sanders isn't just a name," he continued. "It's a legacy. My family controls most of the East Coast's underground networks. Shipping, protection, information. Things people don't talk about in polite company." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "You're Mafia," he finished. "Head of the Sanders crime syndicate. Those men down there. Some of them are mine. Some of them." His jaw clenched. "Some of them want me dead." I stepped back, my spine hitting the wall. Everything clicked into place. The gun, the expensive wallet, the black metal card. The way he'd said don't call the police like it was a command he expected to be obeyed. Saved a Mafia boss. I'd brought him into my home, bandaged his wounds, let him sleep on my couch. And now his world was parked outside my building. "I didn't know," I breathed. "I know." His eyes softened just for a moment. But they do. And that means you're involved now, whether you want to be or not. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. 3 precise strikes against my door. Kyle's hand moved to his waistband, where the gun was tucked beneath his ruined shirt. "Stay behind me," he said. But I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. My quiet life, my invisible life, had just shattered like the glass from last night's crash. And there was no going back. The knock came again. Sharper this time, more insistent. Kyle moved toward the door with controlled purpose, his hand still resting on the gun at his waistband. He glanced back at me once, his eyes commanding without words, "Stay back." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. He opened the door. 4 men stood in the hallway, filling the narrow space with their presence. The first one, older salt and pepper hair, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, took one look at Kyle and immediately dropped to one knee. "Boss," he said, his voice rough with relief. "Thank God you're alive." The others followed suit. 3 men kneeling in my shabby apartment hallway like knights before a king. Kyle's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Marcus, get up. All of you." They rose in unison, and Marcus stepped forward, his eyes scanning Kyle's bandaged torso with concern. "We've been searching all night. When the crash happened, when you disappeared, we thought—" "I'm fine," Kyle cut him off. "The woman who lives here helped me." 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I felt naked under their scrutiny, standing there in my wrinkled diner uniform, barefoot, with a stranger's blood still under my fingernails. "She saved your life," Marcus said, and something that might have been respect flickered across his weathered face. "We owe her." 2 more men appeared at the top of the stairs. These ones didn't kneel. They walked in with casual confidence, their hands in their pockets, their expressions unreadable behind dark sunglasses they hadn't bothered to remove indoors. The taller one, lean, angular face, close-cropped black hair, smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. "Kyle," he said smoothly. "You had us worried." Kyle's entire body went still. I saw it. The shift in his posture, the way his hand moved imperceptibly closer to his gun. "One. Kyrie." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Didn't expect to see you here. We came as soon as we heard," the second man, Kyrie, said. He was shorter, stockier, with tattoos crawling up his neck that mirrored Kyle's but felt different somehow. Wanted to make sure our boss was safe." The word boss sounded like mockery in his mouth. Marcus sensed it too. I saw his hand drift toward his coat. "How did you find me?" Kyle asked, his eyes never leaving Juan's face. Juan's smile widened. "We're very thorough. You know that." The air in the apartment shifted, became dense, electric, dangerous. "You should have died in that crash," Juan said, and all pretense dropped from his voice like a mask hitting the floor. Everything happened at once. Juan's hand went for his gun. Marcus shouted a warning. Kyle moved, injured, bandaged, still recovering, but moved with lethal precision, tackling Juan before the weapon cleared his coat. They hit the floor hard. The gun skittered across my cheap laminate flooring. Kyrie lunged forward, pulling his own weapon, but Marcus was faster, slamming him against the wall. The other 2 men drew their guns, shouting commands I couldn't process through the ringing in my ears. Kyle and Juan grappled on the floor, fists connecting with flesh, grunts of pain and rage filling my small apartment. Kyle's bandages were already seeping red. His ribs, the wound I'd wrapped so carefully just hours ago. Kyrie broke free from Marcus, his gun swinging toward Kyle. I didn't think. I saw Juan's weapon on the floor, 3 feet from where I stood frozen. I dove for it. My hands closed around cold metal, heavier than I expected, solid and terrifying and real. I'd never held a gun before, never wanted to. But my mother's last days had taught me something crucial. When someone you care about is dying, you do what needs to be done. I raised the gun, my hand shaking violently, and pointed it at Kyrie. "Stop," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was steel wrapped in fear, Command wrapped in desperation. Kyrie froze. Turned toward me. Behind his sunglasses, I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt his assessment. Felt him calculating whether I'd actually pull the trigger. Kyle used the distraction to drive his elbow into Juan's jaw, a crack of bone that made me flinch. Juan went limp beneath him. The room fell silent except for heavy breathing and the drip of blood onto my floor. Kyle stood slowly, favoring his injured ribs, blood trickling from a split lip. He looked at me, at the gun in my shaking hands, and something flickered across his face. Surprise. Respect. Something else I couldn't name. Kyrie raised his hands slowly. His gun pointed at the ceiling now. That wrong smile returned to his face. Well, he said, looking between me and Kyle. No wonder he likes you. Marcus moved forward. His own weapon trained on Kyrie's head. On your knees. Now. Kyrie complied, still smiling that dead smile. Juan groaned on my floor, consciousness returning. And I stood there, gun still raised, hands still shaking, realizing that the woman I'd been 24 hours ago, the invisible waitress with a quiet life, was gone forever. The gunshot came from outside, sharp and unmistakable, shattering what was left of the morning's fragile calm. Then another. And another. Marcus's head snapped toward the window. They brought backup. We need to move. Now. Kyle was already moving, ignoring the fresh blood seeping through his bandages. He grabbed my wrist, the one still holding Juan's gun, and pulled me toward the door. Wait. I started, but he cut me off. No time. They're not here to talk. More gunfire erupted outside, a staccato rhythm of violence that made my apartment walls seem paper-thin. I heard shouting, the screech of tires, the distinctive ping of bullets hitting metal. Marcus zip-tied Juan's and Kyrie's wrists with brutal efficiency, then nodded to the other two men. Take them to the secondary location. Don't let them breathe without permission. We burst into the hallway. Kyle kept me close, his body positioned between me and the stairs. His gun drawn now despite his injured ribs. We moved fast. Down 3 flights, my bare feet slapping against cold concrete, my heart threatening to explode from my chest. The lobby was chaos. Through the glass front doors, I saw muzzle flashes. Men using the SUVs as cover, trading fire with others positioned across the street. The distinctive crack 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 of automatic weapons made my teeth hurt. Side exit, Kyle commanded, pushing me left. We crashed through a maintenance door I'd never noticed before, emerging into a narrow alley behind my building. Rain had started again, cold and punishing, turning the alley into a river of oil-slicked water. One of the black SUVs waited there, engine running, back door open. A woman sat in the driver's seat, dark hair pulled back severe, eyes like chips of ice scanning the alley with professional precision. Get in, she shouted. Kyle shoved me into the back seat and dove in after me. The door wasn't even closed before the SUV lurched forward, tires spinning on wet pavement, the engine roaring as we shot out of the alley. Gunfire chased us. The back window spider-webbed but didn't shatter. Bulletproof glass. They're following, the driver barked, her eyes on the rearview mirror. 2 vehicles. Maybe 3. Kyle leaned forward, one hand pressed to his bleeding ribs, the other gripping the passenger headrest. Take Riverside. Lose them in the industrial district. The SUV swerved hard right, throwing me against Kyle. He grunted in pain but didn't move away. Outside, the city blurred. Early morning traffic scattering as we blasted through intersections, the speedometer climbing past 70. Behind us, 2 black SUVs, identical to ours but filled with enemies, matched our pace. They're gaining, the driver said, her voice unnaturally calm. Kyle's breathing was labored now, each inhale sharp with pain. His bandages were soaked through, his face pale beneath the blood and bruises. Kyle, I started. I'm fine. You're not. The SUV swerved again, harder this time. I heard gunfire, felt the impact of bullets against the armored exterior like fists pounding on a drum. Take the wheel, the driver commanded, her right hand moving to the gun on her lap. What? Kyle and I said simultaneously. Well, I need to return fire. Kyle cursed, then leaned forward awkwardly, his injured body protesting every movement. He gripped the steering wheel with his left hand while the driver, whoever she was, rolled down her window and leaned out with a compact rifle. Amaya, Kyle grunted through clenched teeth. I need your hands. My what? Left hand on the bottom of the wheel. Help me steer. Now. I didn't hesitate. I reached forward, my hand closing over the bottom portion of the steering wheel, feeling the vehicle's violent pull through my palm. Kyle called out directions. Left. He's right. Straight. While I helped him guide the massive vehicle through rain-slicked streets. The rifle barked above us. Glass shattered behind us. The driver ducked back inside. One vehicle disabled. The others still. Another swerve. My shoulder slammed into the door. Kyle's face went white with pain, but his hand never left the wheel. You should have walked away, he said suddenly, his voice rough. Last night. This morning. You should have walked away from me. I kept my hand on the wheel, kept helping him steer through the chaos. I didn't, I said simply. You could have been safe. Safe is overrated. He laughed, a short, pained sound that might have been admiration. You're insane, says the man bleeding all over an SUV. Another turn. The industrial district opened up before us. Warehouses and empty lots, fewer witnesses, more room to maneuver. The pursuing SUV fell back, losing ground. Kyle finally eased his grip on the wheel, letting the driver take full control again. He collapsed back against the seat, his breathing ragged, his eyes finding mine in the chaos. I will protect you now, he said, and it wasn't a promise. It was a vow carved from something deeper than obligation. You're mine to guard. You understand that. I nodded, not trusting my voice. They know your face, your address, everything. His jaw clenched. You can't go back to that life. Not anymore. The rain hammered against the bulletproof glass. And I realized he was right. The quiet waitress named Amaya Adams had died the moment I ran toward that crash. What remained was something else entirely. The safe house was a third-floor apartment in a building that looked abandoned from the outside. Boarded windows, graffiti-tagged walls, the kind of place even squatters avoided. Inside it was different. Clean. Furnished with essentials. A tactical retreat dressed as urban decay. Kyle collapsed onto a leather couch the moment we entered. His face gray. His bandages completely soaked through. The driver, who'd introduced herself only as Raina, immediately began pulling fresh medical supplies from a cabinet that looked like it had been stocked for exactly this kind of emergency. You need a hospital, I said, kneeling beside him. Can't. His voice was tight with pain. Hospitals ask questions. File reports. You're going to bleed out. Then you better work fast. Raina handed me supplies without a word. Fresh gauze, antiseptic, surgical tape. She'd already pulled out her phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences to someone on the other end. I peeled away Kyle's ruined bandages, revealing the reopened wound along his ribs. Worse than before. Deeper. The chase had torn everything I'd carefully repaired. This is going to hurt, I warned. It already does. I worked in silence, my hands steadier now than they'd been when I'd pointed a gun at Kyrie. Muscle memory took over, clean, pack, wrap, secure. Behind me, Raina ended her call. Marcus is 10 minutes out, she said. He has information. Kyle nodded, his jaw clenched against the pain. When Marcus arrived, he looked like he'd aged a decade. Blood spattered his coat, exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. He dropped a tablet onto the coffee table with more force than necessary. We got them talking, he said without preamble. Juan and Kyrie. Kyle sat up straighter despite his injuries. And they're not independent operators. They've been embedded in your organization for 8 months. Planted by the Volkov family. The name hung in the air like poison. The Russians, Kyle breathed. They've been after our shipping routes for years. It's worse than that. Marcus pulled up files on the tablet. Photographs, documents, communications logs. They've been systematically dismantling your operation from the inside. The crash wasn't random. They sabotaged your car. Tried to make it look like an accident. My hands stilled on the bandage I was wrapping. They tried to kill you. They've been trying for months, Marcus said grimly. 3 attempts we know of now. You've just been too careful. Too lucky. He glanced at me. Until last night. Kyle's hand found mine, brief, grounding. Last night I got luckier. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Juan and Kyrie were supposed to confirm the kill. When they found you alive, they improvised. Planned to finish it themselves and blame the Volkovs for sloppy work. How many others? Kyle asked, his voice deadly quiet. Unknown. We're running full background checks on everyone. But Kyle. Marcus hesitated. This kind of infiltration takes resources. Planning. They knew your routines, your routes, your safe houses. Someone high up gave them access. The implications settled over the room like a shroud. I finished wrapping Kyle's ribs and sat back on my heels, my mind reeling. This is your life, I said suddenly. Constantly looking over your shoulder. Never knowing who to trust. Kyle's eyes met mine, dark, haunted. Yes. Why? The question burst out of me. Why live like this? Why choose this? Marcus quietly excused himself, disappearing into another room. Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I didn't choose it. I inherited it. He stared at his blood-stained hands. My older brother, David. He was supposed to take over the syndicate. He was good at it. Better than me. Charismatic, strategic, ruthless when he needed to be. Past tense. My chest tightened. What happened? He tried to go legitimate. Wanted to move our family's operations into legal territory. Real estate, shipping companies, investments. He thought he could wash away generations of blood with paperwork and good intentions. Kyle's laugh was bitter. He was wrong. They killed him. Rivals thought he was weak. Our own people thought he was betraying the family legacy. He lasted 6 months before someone put 3 bullets in his chest. Kyle's jaw clenched. I found him. Held him while he bled out in a parking garage. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. So I took his place, Kyle continued. Not because I wanted power. Because if I didn't, the syndicate would have torn itself apart. Everything my family built, everything David died trying to transform, would have been picked clean by vultures. You did it for him, I whispered. I did it because I had no choice. His eyes burned into mine. That's what this life is, Amaya. A cage built from duty and blood. You can't leave. You can't trust anyone. You just survive. I should have been terrified. Should have demanded Reina take me somewhere far away. Instead I took his hand. You trusted me, I said quietly. I had no choice. You always have a choice. Something cracked in his expression, a wall coming down just slightly. Why are you still here, he asked. After everything, the guns, the chase, finding out what I am. Why haven't you run? I thought about my quiet life. My invisible existence. The version of myself who poured coffee and kept her head down and never took risks. That woman felt like a stranger now. Because you need someone, I said simply. And I'm not done saving you yet. Kyle's thumb brushed across my knuckles. Gentle, reverent. You might be the most dangerous person I've ever met, he said softly. Good, I replied. Then we're even. 3 days passed in the safe house like held breath. Kyle healed slowly. His ribs still tender, his movements careful. Marcus rotated security teams. Background checks turned up 2 more infiltrators. And the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. Helped where I could. Made coffee. Changed bandages. Learned the names of Kyle's loyal men and women who came and went like ghosts. But mostly I waited. On the fourth morning I woke before dawn, restless, suffocating in the recycled air and dim lighting. Kyle was asleep on the couch, finally resting without pain etched into his features. Marcus had left an hour earlier to follow a lead. Raina was in the back room monitoring security feeds. I just needed air. Just 5 minutes. The building had a small balcony accessible through a maintenance door. Raina had shown me during a security briefing. Private. Secure. 20 feet of rusted metal overlooking an alley no one used. I told myself I'd be safe. I told myself 5 minutes wouldn't matter. I was wrong. The moment I stepped outside, breathing in cold morning air that tasted like freedom, I felt the presence behind me. Too close, too silent. A hand clamped over my mouth before I could scream. An arm locked around my waist, lifting me off my feet with brutal efficiency. I thrashed, tried to bite, tried to fight, but a sharp sting pierced my neck. Chemical burn. Numbness spreading like ice water through my veins. The world tilted sideways. And then nothing. I woke to the smell of rust and oil. My head pounded. My mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. I tried to move and felt resistance. Thick rope binding my wrists to the arms of a metal chair, my ankles secured to its legs. Panic flooded through me, sharp and immediate. I forced my eyes open. Darkness surrounded me, broken only by slivers of gray light filtering through broken windows high above. The space was massive, industrial, abandoned. Old machinery hulked in shadows like sleeping monsters. The concrete floor was stained with things I didn't want to identify. A warehouse. Somewhere far from help. She's awake. Juan's voice cut through the darkness, followed by footsteps. 2 sets, moving toward me with deliberate slowness. Lights blazed on suddenly, blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut against the assault, tears streaming down my face. Sorry about the dramatics, Juan continued, his voice carrying that same dead smile I remembered. But we needed to make sure your boyfriend would come running. My vision adjusted slowly. Juan stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking relaxed despite the zip tie marks still visible on his wrists. Kyrie flanked him, arms crossed, his face impassive. How did you? My voice came out hoarse. Marcus had you. Marcus is good, Kyrie said flatly. We're better. Juan circled me slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. You know what's funny about Kyle Sanders? For all his reputation, for all his power, he has one fatal weakness. He stopped directly behind me. I couldn't see him, could only feel his presence like a blade against my spine. He cares, Juan whispered near my ear. About family. About loyalty. About people who save his life in the rain. I swallowed hard, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. The crash was supposed to kill him clean, Juan continued, circling back into view. Quick. Efficient. But you. He shook his head almost admiringly. You complicated everything. Dragged him to safety. Made him vulnerable. So you're going to use me to kill him, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Smart girl. Juan crouched in front of me, his eyes cold and calculating. He'll come for you. Course he will. He'll bring his best men, his best weapons, his best strategies. And he'll walk straight into a trap because he can't help himself. You don't know him, I said. I know him better than you think. I've spent 8 months studying him. Learning his patterns, his weaknesses, his tells. Juan's smile widened. He will come for you. And he will die for you. Kyrie moved closer, pulling a knife from his belt. Not threatening, just present. A promise of what could happen. We could hurt you, he said matter-of-factly. Make you scream. Record it and send it to Kyle. That would definitely speed things up. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed to beg, to plead, to promise them anything if they'd just let me go. But I thought about Kyle's eyes in the rain. Thought about his hand finding mine in the safe house. Thought about the version of myself who'd run toward a car crash instead of away from it. But we won't, Juan said, standing. Because we're not monsters. We're professionals. And honestly, he gestured around the warehouse. This is already enough. You're already the perfect bait. They stepped back, leaving me alone in the circle of harsh light. He'll figure out where you are, one called from the shadows. He's smart enough for that. And then he'll come. With everything he has. And we'll be waiting, Kyrie added. Silence fell over the warehouse. Heavy, oppressive, thick with anticipation. I tested the ropes. No give. No weakness. They tied me expertly, efficiently. Professional, like one said. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed I was helpless. Assumed I was just bait. Just a waitress who'd stumbled into something bigger than herself. They didn't know about the 3 years I'd spent fighting for my mother's life. The strength you develop when you refuse to watch someone you care about die. The stubbornness that runs deeper than fear. I lifted my head, staring into the darkness where I knew they were watching. I'm not afraid of you, I said clearly. One's laugh echoed back. Genuine, almost delighted. Oh, Amaya, he said from the shadows. That's exactly what makes you perfect. The explosion came first. Distant but unmistakable, rattling the warehouse's broken windows. One's head snapped toward the sound. They're here. Kyrie moved to the shadows, his weapon drawn. Positions. Men I hadn't seen emerged from the darkness. 6, maybe 8, fanning out through the warehouse with military precision. They killed the overhead lights, plunging everything back into gray pre-dawn dimness. I was alone in the center of the space, still bound, still helpless. But not for long. The second explosion was closer, a side entrance blowing inward with a deafening crack of splintering metal. Smoke billowed through the opening, thick and acrid. Then gunfire. The distinctive crack of assault rifles, the deeper boom of shotguns, the sharp reports of handguns, all layered into a symphony of violence that made my ears ring. Contact left. 2 on the catwalk. Suppressing fire. Asterisk now asterisk. Kyle's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Commanding, furious, alive. He came through the smoke like an avenging ghost, his weapon raised. His movements sharp despite his injuries. Marcus flanked him on one side, Reyna on the other. More of his people spread through the warehouse, engaging Juan's men in brutal close-quarters combat. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Bullets pinged off metal machinery, sending sparks cascading through the smoke-thick air. Amaya! Kyle's shout reached me through the gunfire. Here! I screamed back. A figure moved through the chaos toward me. Not Kyle, but one of Juan's men. He raised his weapon, his intention clear. A single shot dropped him before he could fire. Reyna, moving like a shadow, already repositioning. Kyle fought his way toward me, taking down anyone who stood between us. He moved like violence given form. Efficient, brutal, unstoppable. But Juan had planned for this. Now! Juan's command rang out. The trap sprung. Lights blazed on again. Blinding, disorienting. Kyle stumbled, raising his hand against the assault. In that half-second of vulnerability, 3 men converged on him from different angles. He took down 2, one with a devastating elbow strike, the other with a point-blank shot, but the third got behind him, locking an arm around his throat. Kyle dropped his weapon, his hands clawing at the chokehold, and Juan emerged from the shadows, his gun raised, walking slowly toward Kyle with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "Stop fighting," Juan shouted to the warehouse, "or I put a bullet in his brain." The gunfire ceased. An awful silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the crackle of small fires. Marcus stood 20 feet away, his weapon trained on Juan. Reyna emerged from behind cover, her rifle steady. But they were too far. Any shot risked hitting Kyle. Juan pressed his gun against Kyle's temple. "Drop your weapons," Juan commanded. "All of you. Now." One by one, Guns clattered to the concrete floor. One smiled that dead smile. There. Much better. His eyes found mine across the warehouse. See, Amaya. I told you he'd come. I told you he'd die for you. Kyle's eyes met mine. Dark, fierce, apologetic. I'd been working at the ropes since the moment the fighting started. The chaos had given me cover. The noise had masked the sound of the metal chair leg grinding against the concrete. I'd found a sharp edge on the machinery behind me. A jagged piece of broken equipment that had cut my wrists bloody but had also cut the ropes. Almost through. Almost. Any last words? One asked Kyle mockingly. Yeah, Kyle rasped through the chokehold. You talk too much. The final rope strand snapped. I exploded out of the chair, my hand closing around the gun the first man had dropped. The one Reyna had killed, the weapon lying just within reach. My body moved on instinct. On adrenaline. On 3 days of watching Kyle's people handle weapons. Learning without realizing I was learning. I raised the gun. Juan's head turned toward me, surprise flickering across his face. No, he started. Pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked through my arms. The sound deafened me. Juan's gun fell from his hand. He staggered backward, eyes wide, a red stain blooming across his shoulder. Not a kill shot, I wasn't that good, but enough. Kyle moved instantly. He drove his head backward into his captor's face, broke the chokehold, spun and delivered a strike that dropped the man like a stone. Marcus and Reyna surged forward, weapons raised. Kyrie broke from cover, running toward a back exit. Reyna tracked him with her rifle, her finger on the trigger. Let him go, Kyle commanded, his voice rough. Reyna hesitated, then lowered her weapon. Kyrie disappeared into the dawn light. His footsteps fading. Kyle crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. His hands found my face, my arms, checking for injuries with shaking fingers. Are you hurt? Did they? I'm okay, I breathed. Kyle, I'm okay. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me with desperate strength. I felt him trembling, this powerful, dangerous man who commanded armies and survived assassination attempts, shaking like a leaf in my arms. You shot him, he whispered against my hair. You actually shot him. He was going to kill you. I know. His grip tightened. I know. Around us, his people secured the warehouse, checking bodies, extinguishing fires. Marcus approached cautiously, giving us space. Boss, he said quietly. We need to move. Police will be here soon. Kyle nodded but didn't let me go. Not yet. I'm sorry, he said into my hair. I'm so sorry. This should never have. Stop, I cut him off. Just stop. I pulled back enough to look at his face. Bruised, bloodied, beautiful in its raw humanity. I chose this, I said firmly. I chose you. Stop apologizing for it. Something broke behind his eyes. Relief, gratitude, something deeper than words could name. We need to go, Marcus pressed gently. Kyle took my hand, careful of my rope-burned wrists, mindful of the blood, and led me toward the exit, toward whatever came next. Together. The lake house sat at the end of a winding dirt road, hidden among pine trees that whispered secrets to the wind. No neighbors, no city lights, just water and sky and silence that felt like a benediction after days of gunfire and chaos. Kyle's people had swept the property twice before letting us enter. Now they maintained a perimeter, invisible but present, giving us the illusion of solitude while ensuring our safety. I stood on the wooden deck, watching morning light paint the lake in shades of gold and silver. The water was so still it reflected the sky perfectly, creating the illusion of infinite space. No rain, no thunder, just quiet. Behind me the screen door creaked open. Kyle emerged, moving slowly, his torso freshly bandaged beneath a clean white shirt someone had left in the house. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear, alert, alive. You should be resting, I said without turning around. So should you. He came to stand beside me at the railing, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. We'd barely spoken during the drive here, both too raw, too overwhelmed by what we'd survived. "How are your wrists?" he asked quietly. I looked down at the gauze wrapped around them, covering the rope burns and cuts. "They'll heal. Amaya. Don't." I turned to face him. "Don't apologize again. We've been through this." His jaw clenched. "You could have died because of me. I could have died crossing the street, or choking on bad diner coffee, or from 1,000 other random ways the universe kills people." I held his gaze. At least this time it meant something. Killing Juan meant something. Saving you meant something. The words hung between us, simple and undeniable. Kyle's hand rose slowly, his fingers ghosting along my jawline with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his life. "I'm not used to being saved," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you needed someone to." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, careful, reverent. "Everyone who gets close to me ends up hurt. Or dead. It's not a metaphor, Amaya. It's a pattern. Your brother, among others." I covered his hand with mine, holding it against my face. "Then I guess I'm breaking the pattern. You're insane. You've mentioned that before." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first real one I'd seen since the warehouse. "What am I supposed to do with you?" "Keep me," I said simply. "If you want." His breath caught. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." I turned my hand so our palms pressed together, fingers interlacing. "I know your life is dangerous. I know there will be more Juans and Kyries. I know I can't go back to pouring coffee and pretending the world is simple. You should want to go back. But I don't." The truth of it settled in my chest, solid and certain. That woman, the one who kept her head down and played it safe, she was half alive, going through motions, existing but not living. Kyle's other hand found my waist, pulling me closer. "And now I'm terrified. And exhausted. And I have rope burns and a man's blood on my conscience." I looked up at him. "But I'm alive, Kyle. Really alive. For the first time in years." His forehead dropped to mine, his eyes closing. "I can't promise you safety. I'm not asking for safety. I can't promise you normal. Normal is overrated. Amaya." "I'm asking you to let me stay," I interrupted. "To stop trying to protect me from your world and just let me be part of it. Part of you." When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with something that looked like hope struggling against a lifetime of loss. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not." Smiled. "But you're stuck with me anyway." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, and the sound of it felt like victory. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Good thing you like stubborn." His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. I answered by rising on my toes, by threading my fingers through his hair, by kissing him back with everything I couldn't put into words. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, the sun had climbed higher. The lake sparkled. Birds called from the pine trees. Kyle's hand found mine again. Not desperate this time, not urgent. Just there. Present. Frozen. "What happens now?" Yes. "Now." He looked out at the water, then back at me. "Now we figure it out together." "Together," I echoed. "Together," he confirmed. We stood on the deck as morning turned to midday. Two people who'd saved each other in ways that had nothing to do with guns and everything to do with choosing to see the humanity in someone everyone else called dangerous. The lake reflected infinity. And for the first time since the night of the crash, I felt like I could breathe. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this story. Every view, every comment, every moment you spend here keeps these stories alive. If you felt this one, make sure to subscribe, and let me know you watched to the end.